Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would like to call this operations work group meeting dated Monday, September 16th, 2024 to order. We have two written statements, one in support of school nurses hired prior to 2022 to be included in remedying the issues of salary compression for student services staff, and one in support of continuing the work of the Natural Circles of Support Pathfinder program in partnership with the district. We have two in-person public speakers. The first is Jeffrey Lewis. Here? Yes, please.
How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Doing good? I didn't expect to be so comfortable here. I know I only got 3 minutes and I've wasted 15 seconds. That's okay. They're just really two, I'm gonna be brief. What's this?
That's just so everyone.
Oh, gosh. Oh, I got a clock.
We'll put 15 seconds back on the clock.
No, you're good. So I'm the executive director for Natural Circles of Support. We've been working with the district in partnership for really 11 years, pretty continuously and deeply. And there are two things I want to do, well, maybe three. One is I want to just express gratitude. I want to tell you that it's not always been easy. It's been up and down. It's been rough at times. It's been really successful at times. But more than anything else, you've stuck with us and we're really committed to you. And for that, I am really grateful. I'm particularly grateful for two reasons. One, I got a lot of that left. One is, we finally last year was able to work in the district in the way that we've wanted to work. So in the past, like a lot of other organizations, we come in to do direct services. We do mentoring and support for Black students. We started with Black boys, added Black girls. And we tried to work with staff, but we've never done that consistently well. I mean, just not having that the opportunity. And so our work has been more direct service. Last year, we got a contract which allowed us to really think about how do we build capacity within the district for you all to do the work that we do. And so last year, we had a cohort of 7 non-credential African-American staff who had different positions in the district, but all of whom we were able to work with in terms of becoming what we call facilitator mentors, to help them learn to be mentors and to facilitate the learning and education of our young Black students, to connect their experiences in their mentoring circles with the classrooms. So again, to build their capacities as educators. And so what I want to say there is that I know we need more Black teachers, but I think we can't wait on Black teachers. You have Black staff in the district who are ready to be educators. Let them be educators, build that capacity now. Some of them will become teachers, others will not, but they can all educate our Black students. They're ready to do it and they want to do it. So that's one thing. The other thing is this. We developed a program 2 summers ago, and it's actually Corey Foster, he's brainstorm, but he had 2 students come to him 2 summers ago. Both of whom were concerned. They were graduating and they thought, okay, we have prison or death in our future. We don't get some support. So we created this Pathfinders program. We want to help them get through their transition into young adulthood and into also to bridge the summer for other students who might be at risk. It was successful. We came back and had it again. They wanted it. We came back, had it again this past summer. But what happened this past summer that we didn't expect was that families got engaged in ways that we never anticipated. And it became 3-generational support around our Black students. We have weekly activities. Our parents were in circle with us. And they told us, we can't let this go. So that's pretty good.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Maya Whitson.
Hello, everyone. I am Maya Whitson. I am here in support of Natural Circles of Support and Pathfinder program. I'm a facilitator for Natural Circles and I am a mentor with Pathfinders. But I'm also a mother of two students here in the MMFB school district. I have a 16-year-old at East and a 6-year-old at Hawthorne. I wrote this letter in advance, but I didn't submit it. I thought it'd be better if I just read it. But I'm writing it to express my strong support for the continued funding for Pathfinders and Natural Circles of Support. They are essential programs that serve African-American children in our community. Their contributions are critical to the education and personal development of these students. Pathfinders and Natural Circles of Support offer more than just academic assistance. They provide a sense of belonging and family that's invaluable to the students and their families. However, it's disheartening to see many similar programs offered to Black students for only limited periods of time. Just as students begin to feel comfortable and supported, funding often stops. These vital programs are taken away. This inconsistency can make students feel undervalued, despite the truth that our community deeply values their success and well-being. The families of the students we work with have consistently expressed their deep appreciation for these programs. They value not only the academic support, but also the community and familial bonds that we have fostered through our work. Our programs are integral to their lives, providing stability, encouragement, and a sense of belonging that's essential for their growth and success. Given these profound and multifaceted benefits these programs offer, I urge the board to ensure their continued funding. Investing in Pathfinders and Natural Circles is investing in the future of our students and the well-being of our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes our public comment portion of the meeting. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated August 12th, 2024.
Second.
Megan, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, that motion carries 7-0. So our agenda tonight does look quite full, but 3 of those items are related to the new collective bargaining agreement that we have reached with our partners over at MTI through months of long, hard work. The next item is reviewing the 2 budgets that we will be reviewing and passing, one contingent on a passing referendum, the other contingent on not passing. We will review some revenue limit membership. The main new pieces of data we have here are the summer enrollment counts. We'll review the salary compression for student services idea that will be presented from administration. Finally, food and nutrition update, cash flow borrowing, and referenda and facilities update. Some of these will be action items at the regular board meeting, and I'll let us know when those arise. So thank you. Moving on to the collective bargaining agreements.
Thank you very much, Chair Castro, members of the board and staff. One, I just want to thank you for the add of these items late last week. In looking at when the vote tonight would effectuate the change in compensation status, it was determined that instead of waiting until November, that we would like to ensure that staff can see this increase sooner with your approval tonight. So for that reason, staff gathered the appropriate materials and made sure that you had them, and they are before you tonight for your consideration. This again is after successful ratification from MTI, and that's the 3 units of teachers, educational support personnel, and substitute teachers. I've asked Associate General Counsel Ben Gilbers to give you an overview of the information before you tonight. That, Ben, I think you're online, and I'll have you take it from here.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. So, yeah, as Joe said, it appears that not it appears, we have reached a tentative agreement with MTI, regarding the 24-25 base wages. So, as Joe noted, MTI indicated to us that they have ratified this agreement, and so now we're bringing it to the board for your consideration. So, the tentative agreement that we reached is that there will be a 2.06% base wage increase for the 24-25 school year. And there will be an additional 2.06% base wage increase if the operating referendum in November passes. Absent referendum passing in November, the base wage increase for the 24-25 school year would be 2.06%. I think that's really all there is to it at this point. I would open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Any board members online with questions? Board member Vandermeulen?
Yes. Now, are we then formally voting on this on the 30th, or is this ratified tonight?
So MTI has ratified it. I think the hope is that the board can ratify the agreement or approve the tentative agreement at tonight's meeting.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so for this first item here, I have a motion for us to ratify and approve this. So this is for the teacher unit. I move that the Board of Education ratify the Madison Teachers Inc. Teachers Unit collective bargaining agreement for base wage increase for the period of July 1, 2024 through June 30, 2025.
Second, Maya.
Second, board member Pearson. Megan, your advisory vote. All those in favor? All right, motion carries. Okay, moving on to item 5.1, the educational support employees. I move that the Board of Education ratify the Madison Teachers Inc. Educational Support Employees Association collective bargaining agreement for base wage increase for the period of July 1, 2024 through June 30, 2025.
Second, Maya.
Second, Maya. Megan, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, moving on to 6.1 substitute teachers. I move that the Board of Education ratify the Madison Teachers Inc. Substitute Teachers Unit collective bargaining agreement for base wage increase for the period of July 1, 2024 through June 30, 2025.
Second.
Second.
Second, Maya. Megan, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Okay, any other discussion? That's too late now. Okay, on to item 7.1. We will see this as an action item in October, I believe, but just reviewing the two budgets contingent on passing referendum, not passing.
Thank you again, Chair Castro, members of the board. Just to share with you, Assistant Superintendent Solner tonight has a number of items that he is going to go through as it relates to budget and operations. I won't stop each time to introduce each title. I'll just turn it over to Bob and our team, who will be joining him to present them as presented in your agenda tonight. Then I'll turn it over to Bob.
Good evening. Good evening. Slide deck. Okay. So this is the newest from the Media Teams Archives, beautiful picture of Southside Celebration a few weeks ago. Go to the next slide in terms of just important to establish the strategic framework for the fiscal year. Every child is on track to graduate, ready for college, career, and community. The district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, and African-American children and youth excel at school. Our core values of belonging, excellence, racial equity, and social justice, along with voice, focus, and creativity, have guided the work of the board in terms of the 24-25 budget. And will continue to guide us as we work towards the budgets that were mentioned. So you want to go to the agenda for tonight, so I'll just quickly go through it. I want to just reiterate some of the conversations we've been having. We'll be presenting you two budgets at the October board meeting. We're gonna focus on a couple of proposed amendments to that. We want to talk about that tonight. That will be the student services salary compression issue, along with revised budget for food and nutrition fund 50. But before we get to that, we want to spend a little bit of time on the revenue limit membership. And the key variables that we know. We know one, and it's good news, summer school. And then we'll talk about the cash flow that we do every year at this meeting. And then depending on the amount of time that we have, a very high level overview just of the conversations we've been having with the community regarding the two referendum questions in terms of operations. So Chair Castro has already talked about the outcomes and the decisions that you will continue to look at this month and we move into October. So I'm going to just kind of jump right on into that budget timeline in terms of the 24-25 budget. We are in the midst of it as we approach September, talking about the budget amendments this month and potential budget amendments as they arrive in October, in preparation for those two budgets that I mentioned. Option 2 of our budget is the June preliminary budget for 24-25 that was approved by the board. I've updated based on some of the actions that are happening, in particular the vote on the 2.06 retroactive raise. Also have incorporated into those revised numbers for this budget the substitute teacher pay raise that the board decided on a few months ago. That's been added to that budget that will be in effect if the operating referendum does not pass in November. So going to the next slide is the high level overview of where we are at in terms of the last 2 years actuals. In terms of revenues and expenditures, you can see in terms of the 23-24 unaudited actual. We talked about this at the last operations work group. We had a year where our budgeted expenditures were significantly less than our actual expenditures, really in the terms of area of salary and benefits. We had some unbudgeted revenues from the closure of some of the TIDs that were planned. So we ended the year positive, 23-24, at just under $24 million. What sets us up in a good position financially for the preliminary budget that you have approved and that is going to be revised as we approach that vote in October. And so we're starting the year with $114.6 million Fund 10 balance. With the revised budget, you'll see a $46.78 million number. That is a reflection of using one-time revenues to sustain the expenditures of $496.6 million. What that does is it's a revision in terms of using more one-time revenues, again, primarily the 2.06% and the substitute teacher pay raise. The total difference between the June budget and now, or where we stand today, is about $7.8 million more in one-time revenue. So We're projecting right now, and we'll have more detailed fund balance statements for the October operations support group. But the budget as it stands now, the budget that you approved in June and that we revised still maintains the board's policy, fund balance policy unassigned of between 10 and 15%.
I'm sorry. I think I'm misunderstanding. So you're saying right now with a fund balance of $114 million, we are between 10 and 15% of our overall budget?
No, at the end of 24-25,
We will.
which I don't
Okay.
have the final calculation, we are between 10 and 15. That is, we've seen the 46.8 million, 24-25, and this is not unassigned fund balance. This is the entire fund balance at 67.9. So that dollar amount will shrink a little bit given the calculations now and the October board meeting. At the end of 25, we're projecting to be with.
Thank you.
I'll have the updated where that percentage is for 23-24 for October. Just pause and see if there's any other questions. It's really setting the framework for the conversations that are coming up in terms of the budget amendment.
Any members online?
All right.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Now just shifting over in terms of the school finance and revenue limits, this is just a little bit of a refresher. Our revenue limits, which dictate the amount of available revenues we have between general aids and the authority to levy a property tax, are constrained by the state imposed revenue limits. Those revenue limits for this year it's critically important to know the third Friday in September 2024, coming up this Friday, for us to set our final budget for the 24-25 school year. But it's a 3-year rolling average. And so the impact of this September, although it's very important for our 24-25 calculation, it'll take 3 years for account fully into the rolling average. It's just kind of the beginning of a difficult picture by state law design, and it is for us to decide our revenues and our expenditures for the year that we're in, because we're waiting for obviously the third Friday count, big piece. And we won't know that until it happens this Friday. The next slide, Jeffy. So the good news that I can say is our summer school count that we reported to DPI is up 54 FTE compared to summer of 23. That's 18% increase, which is a healthy increase, which I view as a positive increase. Now, I'd love to be able to give you some updates in terms of where we think we are for the third Friday count, but it's a complicated number. It's much more than just counting the number of students that are in our classrooms. It's complicated because state law says it's complicated, and we have to follow the process to go through it. There's a lot of additions and there's some subtractions. It's a bit of a process. It'll take our team here at the department, Fatima and her team, our registrar, a good 2 weeks to get that report. Actually, the report's going to be due a little bit before the 2 weeks on October 2nd. And then the other counts that will become available are the independent charter schools that operate and our residents attend. We won't get that final count from the state until October 15th. The same day we'll get our final revenue limit calculation. The same day we'll get our certified general aids for the year. Once we get those pieces, then we'll know what your maximum authority is to levy for that October meeting. So right up until mid-October, it's going to be, as it always is, recent state law, it's kind of a moving target. But we'll stay on top of that and continue to update the numbers and give you 2 resolutions to take a look at come October. So we'll have these numbers updated when it comes in terms of our counts that we can control for the October operations work group. And then I'll continue to work with the independent charter schools they're continuing and are very, very upfront and sharing of information before the actual reports are due to DPI. So last year, we were able to get a pretty good sense from the independent charter schools where they thought their enrollments are, just like we are gonna have a pretty good sense before the 15th of what our counts are. So the next slide is a bit of a summary of the changes that we just talked about, so you can see it. Cindy Green and her team prepared this, in terms of, it was intentional, this year to try to offer some additional enrichment, virtual and in-person classes. They also incorporated the Summer Arts Academy into the summer program. They hired additional certified instructors, and why that's important is we can't count students for summer school FT unless they're taught by certified instructors. We can offer programming, but we cannot count the kids unless they're certified instructors. So that's of talking about the hiring of additional instructors. And then just saw a slight increase, which is, it's real positive news. I've already told you in terms of the third Friday in September, it's coming up this Friday. And then also the timeline for the charter schools. But we'll have a pretty good sense on the October operations work group, because we'll have to have our information submitted to the state by then. And I'll continue to work with the directors and leaders of the independent charter schools on getting that update. Also. Okay, so that's kind of budget overview and where we're going there. I'm gonna introduce the next, I'll just pause for any questions.
Board Member Simkin?
I'm wondering about summer school. So my memory regarding summer school was that we were capping student enrollment in order to be able to provide the higher salary for teachers. So having a smaller, like an intentionally smaller group. So I'm curious about whether this is a pivot or if the increase in students stayed within that same amount of budget that we were last presented.
Yeah. Cindy, do you want to address that?
I absolutely can. Good evening, board, and good evening, and thank you for the question, board member Simpkin. That is correct. At the K-8 level, we had enrollment that had a cap to it. However, many of our increases were at the high school level, where we were able to run more virtual coursework for students, as well as begin to run new courses that were for first-time credit. If you recall, we provided some of those to the Board of Education last spring. So some of our increases were definitely at the high school level that we're excited about in terms of testing out a few new things this past summer to engage our secondary students.
Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Any members online? Board Member Vandermillen?
Yes, just quick question. The design for summer school isn't changing majorly, if the referendum doesn't pass, or it is, do we know that yet?
No. I'll answer it this way. Any decisions about summer 2025 would be talked by the board when we start looking at the 25-26 budget, which, you know, we'll kind of start introducing that whole concept to you in November of 25 in terms of the operations work, November of 24. I'm sorry, 1 year ahead of myself. We'll start talking about the 25-26 budget in November at the November 24 operations work group. Just kind of getting a sense of where we think our revenues are at in terms of the goals and priorities. We'll start talking about laying the groundworks for that. So any decisions on programming won't happen until the 25-26 budget conversation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions?
we're good. Okay, Jennifer Trendle and her team are gonna talk about the student services salary compression. I will just turn it right on over to Kate and Jennifer. I'll let them introduce themselves. Well, you all know Jennifer, but you can introduce yourself. And Kate, of course.
Jennifer Trottel, the Senior Executive Director of Resources for MSD. And I have Kate Link with me, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Evening, I'm Kate Link. I'm the compensation analyst here at MSD, part of the human resources team.
So we were, did you want to set us up?
No,
Okay.
you. It's all yours. It's your show.
Forgot her or. We received a amendment to the budget for this year to look at salary compression for student services, and this is the results of the analysis that we did. And Kate and some other members of the human resources team did most of the work, and so I'm going to let Kate go forward with presenting the slides.
Thank you, Jennifer. Like Jennifer said, we did some analysis of student services teachers, looking at them kind of in two different ways. So the whole group together, and then kind of splitting out between those hired before 2018 and those hired after 2018. We'll talk a little bit later about why those are differentiated like that, but essentially different practices at those times, different salary schedules at that time, which is why those two groups are kind of broken out like that. So when you're looking at student services teachers, on the whole, their average years of service is about 9 years. And then how many steps above that years of service on average is 9. So if you had someone that had been here for 10 years, average their step would be 19. Because there are different tracks, about 8 different tracks on the salary schedule, it's really hard to compare salaries one-to-one, because education levels and things like that make it not kind of match depending on the track that they're in. So that's why we're kind of using the step as that kind of grounding to see where folks are at. So as you can see, so those hired before 2018 obviously have more tenure, but their average number of steps is quite a bit lower than those folks hired after 2018. So again, just changes in the salary schedule, changes in practices on how those folks were placed at time of hire. So that's what we're going to kind of look to. How do we close that gap for those hired before 2018 to those that were hired after 2018? Go to the next one. So again, just breaking those out. So this is kind of what it would look like to close that gap. Now this is specific to those hired before 2018. So just kind of a snapshot of how many each of those types of teachers there are, and how much per job class that would cost. And this is, again, bringing their steps closer to what it looks like for those people hired after 2018. So about, I would say 99%, 137 of 139 employees are gonna get some sort of increase here. The reason you see a few that aren't is because they're already at the top of the salary schedule, so it's not anywhere for them to go in terms of that, but essentially there are some outliers both at the beginning and end of this spectrum that we kind of need to take a very detailed look at as to why they are outliers like they are. But in general, for everybody here, this is adding about 9 steps to each person's current step.
And
Yeah, please.
I'm going back and my memory is foggy, but was 2018 the year that there was some changes to the steps? Where I remember there was a board vote, I wasn't on the board at that time, but there was a board vote that I thought went to like a half a step, or there was some other way. There was some change to the steps, as I recall.
Yeah.
Can you just verify what happened to the steps?
Yep.
2018?
Yes, yeah, that's coming up, we're gonna talk a little bit about the salary schedule and how it got, why these two groups are kind of off kilter like this, so. You are correct, there was a change to the salary schedule. If we wanna skip ahead to that and start with that first, we can.
No, I just wanna make sure that when I'm seeing something like the number of folks before 2018. Average number of steps above years of service is significantly lower than those after. In some ways, those folks that came after, they may have a higher number of steps because there was some alteration to the steps. Right?
Correct, and there was changes in practices on how those folks were placed. So in the handbook right now, it says that those folks in student services get placed at the 8th level. And that wasn't always in place prior to 2018. So that's part of it, but a larger part of it is how the salary schedule has changed from prior to 2018 to now.
Okay, thanks.
So if you want to go to the next, thank you, this is. So those folks hired after 2018, again, there have been some changes along the way. A lot of that came from when they did change the salary schedule, and kind of in that interim period on how folks were placed. There has also been, some times where not all of these job classes were considered to be advanced placed, so that's why some of those are mismatched. So these folks, we took a look at their actual placements and did some corrections based on what is the practice for people to get placed now. So far fewer teachers here need an adjustment, so 66 of the 179. And it will look a little bit different here because it will depend on their original placement on what is needed to correct their current placement. So putting those together, what would that look like? So again, in this, there is option for nurses broke out if we decided that we wanted to include nurses, because they have not historically been included in the advanced level placement, the same as the other job classes have. So that right there is kind of the total number if we decided to fix both of those groups, including fringe benefits. Those fringe benefits are gonna be your FICA and WRS. It does not include like health benefits and things like that, since they're calculated a little bit differently.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Why would we only include nurses from 2022 after? Why would we include them for 2018?
Nurses would be included all the way to prior to 2018, so all nurses.
Okay.
No.
Okay, I saw the 2022 and got confused.
Oh, yes, so I can speak to that a little bit. Thank you for that question. So nurses, the point in time where nurses kind of had different placement rules began in 2022, so handling them slightly different, but it does include all nurses. It's just that kind of time period where they changed was 2022 rather than 2018.
Thank you. That was my main confusion.
Okay, so we can go to the next, oh,
There's a couple of motions.
yes.
I'm sorry, I thought we were at questions, so I'll wait until you're through.
Okay.
Thank you, good.
So a little bit just about how did we get to this point? So a little bit of history on the salary schedule and how it has changed throughout the years. So as you can see, in 1999, it started at level 1. And then as time went on, that basically the top level was kind of removed. And so in 2000, the salary schedule started at level 2, so on and so forth until we got to 2018. The very beginning of the salary schedule was level 8. And then in the fall of 2018 was where a large change came in. Some of those changes were moving from a numeric schedule, so being level 1, 2, 3, and so on. It started at level A for an alphabetic. And so level A was the same as what was currently level 8. There were also some improvement levels that were added in 5-year increments. Also eliminated half steps. So prior to 2018, there were what was considered half steps, or folks would be basically held at a certain salary level for 2 years while they went through that half step. So that was eliminated. And then because of that, an annual step increase to all levels rather than folks being held at those half steps. So when those changes were made, the folks that were hired before 2018 did not receive any corrections, which is how they have gotten to that kind of lopsided steps. And since then, there have been a few, like I said, there's a few teachers that are like on the outside of the spectrum, so those ones we'll have to look at very much individually. But in general, it's kind of a holistic approach to how do we look at those folks that were hired before 2018 to close that gap.
So is this the time for questions?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, Ali was gonna go, but Michelle, it appears you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is going back a couple slides. I just want to confirm what I'm seeing. So I'm toggling between slides 16 and 17, so you know what I'm looking at.
Okay.
When I look at slide 17, it looks like the social worker number goes from 24 to 48. Social workers would still get correction, so it kind of like doubles. And when I look at psychologists, it looks like there's almost like a doubling in that role as well, and the others look fairly consistent. So what was the distinction again between slide 16 and slide 17?
Yeah, so slide 16, that's specifically focused on those student services teachers that were hired before 2018.
Okay,
So when you look at like social workers, so right now there are 24 social workers that were hired before 2018.
okay,
Then when we look at the next slide, slide 17, those are ones hired after 2018. So after 2018, there are 48 social workers. So that's why the numbers are different. We're just looking at their start date.
got it. Okay, thank you. And even within that group, are you on that same slide? Are you saying in that lower right hand box, even within that group, there would still be 66 employees who would need adjustment?
That's correct.
Okay, and then in the previous slide, there were 137 employees before 2018 who would need an adjustment.
Correct.
So 137, then the 66, and then that brought us to the next slide, which was the total.
Mhm.
Okay,
Correct, yep, the total of those, total first slide 16 and 17 are together on slide 18.
okay, thank you.
Board Member Muldrow?
Yeah, I want to thank all the people who have reached out to our board to bring this to our attention. We've been hearing folks talk about this, or at least I have on the board for the last few years. I also want to thank the administration for kind of confronting this head on at this point. And I want to thank our superintendent for making this a priority as you get started this year. I'm a little curious about that 1.7 million figure that would be what it costs to reconcile this in its entirety. And so I'm curious about when we invest that, how we invest that, and the overall impact of reconciling something that is necessary in order to make our pay scale fair to people and the work that they've done and the time they've given this organization.
Yeah, so in terms of timing of it, I mean, these specific numbers are using the current salary tables, so that is one other thing to consider if the other amendments are voted on where the salary tables will increase, that will affect this number. But in terms of timing, you know, if we could certainly break it out by job class, or this would look like corrections as whenever we can get them, as soon as we can get them on the following pay periods.
Because this has been a long-term issue and we've had folks advocating for kind of the discrepancy in their wage over the course of the last few years, is there any kind of retroactive process that we're engaging in order to reconcile folks who feel like I haven't been compensated appropriately for several years and it's had a significant impact on my morale and also my financial reality?
So the analysis that we did includes a retro back to July 1st of 2024 for this fiscal year. On slide 21, we did put together some next steps because we understand that this impacts not just this subset of the teacher unit, but we would like to take a look at the entire district and where this impacts some of our other employees so that we don't get into this situation again.
That's really good to hear and I think deeply encouraging. One of the things I hope comes out of this conversation tonight is that folks don't feel like they have to email us about it, don't feel as compelled to advocate, and can trust that we as an administration and a board are partnering to resolve this proactively. So I think this work is tremendously important, and making sure folks know what this work will look like and mean to them in terms of the material reality is pretty relevant. My last question, in terms of reconciling kind of where people are at, is kind of the competitiveness of our wages and then vacancies within these roles. So are we struggling to fill these positions? How many vacancies is there within student services? And overall, if we analyze kind of the competitiveness of the wage that we are offering, how do we compare to the surrounding areas? And if that information is not available this evening, I completely understand. I know what we're doing is taking a real deep look at ourselves and our own practices, which I think is tremendously important. I also think it's important to place ourselves contextually in terms of how we're compensating people. And if we're fighting to make sure people have a high wage and a quality wage and a living wage and are seeing the promotion that they deserve after committing long-term to this district, how does that compare to our surrounding areas and the rest of the state? If folks have an answer, I'll take it. If not, I would love to continue the conversation at a later date.
So I think I have some answers and maybe some not. In terms of the number of vacancies, in student services, I don't have that number to hand, but that's certainly something that we can get. Part of some of these next steps, I think, is very much looking at the salary schedule. So not only the base wage, but how that salary schedule is in terms of the tracks, in terms of improvement levels, basically from the bottom up, and kind of thinking about possibly simplifying that. Also, exploring some options about how student services are placed on that salary schedule, all of those things and how it does compare to other districts. We are right now, in terms of other districts, some ahead and some behind. So I think that's definitely part of that, kind of looking for that salary schedule from the bottom up is how does that base wage compare? And then how can we make some changes that simplify the pay structure for our teachers and also help to reduce compression issues in the future.
I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate, Jennifer, the comment that we want to have a holistic analysis in order to not be piecemealing this together over and over again, year after year, and to have a coherent plan that is relevant to our entire staff and faculty. So thank you for doing that work, Chair Castro. That's it for me.
Thank you. Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks. I'm a little under the weather, so I'm calling in from home. I have one question and one thought. My first question is, I heard you say that the fringe benefits don't include health insurance costs. And I was wondering where we would see that piece of the cost analysis show up.
Sure, I can answer that. That cost is already baked into someone's salary, so we did not need to add that on to the slide that shows the total number, but we did have to take into account the fact that employees are responsible for the payroll taxes of Social Security and Medicare, as well as the Wisconsin retirement system portion.
Got it. Thank you. And then my thought was looking at just the total number of people in student services before and after 2018, recognizing that we've put lots of energy and resources towards making sure that we have like enough people in those roles. I would be curious for folks who have stayed in MMSD, serving MMSD students and families, like what is it that accounts for them staying? Because I guess, you know, what I'm understanding here is it's not that we had the most competitive wages. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to find out what else keeps people here in Madison. And that's just an idea to take it or leave it. So that's what came up for me when I was listening. Thanks for working on this. I'm looking forward to supporting it.
Board Member Vandermillen.
Yes, one, thank you for your tremendous work on this. I know when I made the amendment that I was making a giant amendment. Shout out to everyone who helped me, including MTI. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I have like 3 questions. If we have a before and an after 2018, and you said they were fixed differently, you said that they were calculated differently. Is there a way we can calculate them the same, or will it recreate the structural deficit, the compression?
Yeah,
If that
so,
makes sense.
yep. So applying that one size kind of fits all to all of them will just essentially raise everyone's steps and the compression will kind of stay where it's at.
Okay.
So you kind of need to treat them a little bit differently because there are quite a number of folks that were hired after 2018 that do not need a correction. They've gotten the correct advanced placement and all other parts of their placements were correct. So if you just kind of gave them 9 steps, they would jump ahead significantly.
Will we talked about a third party study, which I don't really think we need a third party. I think MTI and the board probably could do it with our financial team. I think Bob is completely capable, but I could be wrong. Bob, please speak if you're not, because I don't want to overburden you and I really don't want to lose Bob. But my question is, if we do that study, can we find out who will be impacted and how they will be impacted?
Yes, we would need to go to an RFP if we use an outside vendor, and the benefit of going to an outside vendor would be to have them look at, maybe some blind spots that we have so that we can focus on those first and address those issues before they become bigger issues than they already are.
And then I have two more questions and one more comment. And thank you, Chair, for not killing me virtually. Because I know it's a lot tonight. Will we be able to share the details of this study with MTI, with Jeff, with the board, and with our public? Because I know we get a lot of questions on how we got to specific numbers. And in the interest of transparency, I want to make sure that it's not something that is solely confidential and can't be shared. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Hey, board member Vandermeulen, can I share one thing? So I want to just make sure I didn't confuse anything. I had made reference to a potential district-wide compression analysis, and that there may be interest in going to an outside vendor to help with that analysis, but there hasn't been, to my knowledge, anything moved on that at this point. So if I spoke with you and gave you, some fusion about like this was already in the works, it's not in the works. It was just a matter of, I think the administration trying to determine if they had the capacity and whether more of an objective view might help in a bigger compression.
Actually, your email came very well timed. I was thinking the same thing and I didn't want to overwork Bob. I have a tendency to accidentally overwork our staff and assume that they could do things that they couldn't. So I was thinking the same vein you were.
Oh, okay. But I know that in the past, I just want to clarify, in the past couple of years, we've had some other kinds of studies around HR, like where, independent consultants have come in and have maybe made some recommendations around HR practices. But I think when and if we get to the point where we're talking about a district-wide compression analysis that's bigger than student services, I think the administration would come back to us with some recommendation about how they would want to move forward. So I just want to say, I apologize if my communication made it seem like they were already going into a study.
Actually, it was really helpful, so I appreciate it.
Okay.
And my last question, I talked to a lot of teachers who then changed careers and got additional training, but they never got the bump up when they switched to that training. Will they get that bump in pay because of the fact they got the additional education, but they were never rewarded for it due to the compression?
So thank you for your question, Board Member Vandermeulen. And I just want to clarify, you're talking about someone who was initially hired as a teacher.
Yep.
And became a social worker and should have had their salary reevaluated when they moved to.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have taken that into account when putting this together.
Perfect. I just want to thank absolutely everyone. I think we definitely have to include the nurses after COVID. It's kind of a no-brainer for me. And I just want to say thank you. And I appreciate everything. And that's all I have, Chair.
Board Member Nichols.
Yes. Board Member Vandermeulen, I just want to confirm, when you did your initial board amendment,
Yes, ma'am.
around student services salary compression, you had used a dollar amount of around 3 million.
Correct.
I guess what I want to confirm tonight is now seeing the analysis that the administration did and seeing the dollar amount at the 1.7 million, are you feeling satisfied that your intention with that amendment has been met?
Yes, I do, but I also would like the 8 million as well on if the referendum passes.
Okay, well, for just on the student services though,
Yes.
you've seen the detail, because I know that was a separate amendment.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
Board Member Van Meulen, this is Bob. I
Hi,
wanted to,
Bob. Thank you.
yeah, it's really Jennifer and her team and Kate, the analysis on student services compression. Way too complicated for me, but they did a great job in terms of putting together the amendment and walking through. We worked on it. I think the numbers are really good. On our slide under next steps, the last bullet point really addresses, from my perspective, that budget amendment that you offered. We talked about the first one, student services. You also offered in June
Yep.
compression issue for the rest of the district at $8 million. And so my recommendation is to talk about that amendment is to really consider in the context of the 25-26 budget and an amendment that we would further develop a timeline and a process where we really feel we would need to put out an RFP for external experts to come in and help us look at any other potential salary compression issues. We envision that analysis really being done over multiple years, starting with specific classifications for a review, much like we've done with student services. We just don't have any data or any information to be able to address generically salary compression for the rest of the district. There's no place for us to begin or start, and we feel that would be the most systemic way of addressing any potential issues is to develop that as part of the 25-26 budget.
I would happen to agree. I would like the 8 million in the referendum. I didn't know if it would happen. The problem with it and why it may not fit in the second referendum is the fact that I don't want to recreate more compression while fixing compression. And so the student services, absolutely, the nurses, absolutely. If we absolutely can't, I can understand it, but I would like a timeline for the 25-26.
Okay, thank you.
Let me take my head up.
You,
And that's it.
any more board member question? Good.
Okay, so Kate, do you feel good on the next steps? We covered everything we needed to cover.
Yes,
think
we
so.
did.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit when there was a question about the salary schedule, so.
So the last, Jesse, if you go back to slide 18. So now we need to talk, get a sense of which budget we want to include this amendment as part of, right? The recommendation from staff is to include it in the budget that would be effective if the operating referendum is successful in November. We talked about the general condition in terms of the 24-25 revised budget and the use of just under 47 million in one-time funds. We haven't finished a complete analysis in terms of ending fund balance for 24-25. But this would be adding a base expenditure where we do not have clearly sufficient ongoing revenues to fund it. So the recommendation from staff is to have that be included in the budget that would be effective if the referendum is successful. And so I'd like to think about that and give us some direction.
I could agree to that as long as all nurses are included on that. I don't think nurses cutting them out would not be acceptable. I need them in.
They're included in 1.74.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if any board members have any inclination or thoughts on this, I could go around and can entertain administration's recommendation.
And is there a motion that we need to take?
No,
And that will be on.
I think that would be on the table for the end of this meeting, yeah, end of September, yeah.
I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
Just the appetite of doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we've been hearing for the past couple of years. And it's something that, you know, we prioritized a few months ago when we were speaking about this, so. Yes, I guess the question would just be how much basically we would fit it into the overall referendum, or is it just after it passes and then it will just be a separate expenditure, I guess?
I think
Added on it.
yeah, I think the two options is adding it contingent on referendum passing and then adding it regardless if the referendum passes.
But it would just be considered an extra expenditure.
Right.
Either way.
Yeah, so under the recommendation, we would include it in the budget as additional expenditures for the budget that would be approved contingent on the operating referendum being successful in November. If the operating referendum would not pass, then it would not be included at all in the 24-25 budget. And so that's the question.
So just so I make sure I understand, it's after the so if contingent on a referendum, it gets added to the 24-25 budget, right? If we vote then say not contingent, then it just doesn't get added for 24-25, but maybe 25-26, possibly.
Right, so if you want it effective in 24-25, regardless of the outcome of the operating referendum. I would add it to the existing budget. That was the existing preliminary budget approved in, much like we just added the 2.06%, the other amendment for the increase substitute teacher pays. We're still working through all the numbers. The question that we're very close, based on the revisions that we made already, and the 47 million, to be within the board policy of 10 to 15% remaining in fund balance. This is if the operating referendum does not pass. The worst case, if it would be included in that budget, we would monitor that throughout the year. And then it may, as we've talked in the past, may require the board to amend its fund balance policy, right? We dip below that 10%. That's why it's a significant ongoing expenditure we're adding without sustainable revenues to maintain for 25. That's the recommendation to put it in the budget, effective if the referendum passes, retroactive back to July 1, obviously, if the referendum does pass. Either way, it'd be retro to July 1, 2024.
Okay.
But that is the question.
Okay. So I'm fine with adding it, regardless. I think that this has been an issue for a while, and I think we owe it to our staff to ensure that we do that. But I also understand our budget constraints and the necessity for after the referendum. So I'm fine with either way. I don't think it's acceptable for us not to add it this year at all. After the work has been done, after we're saying this was a commitment or something that was important for us as a board. So those are just my preliminary thoughts on it.
I'll go, for the time being, I'm okay with option one. I think if the referendum does not, and I don't think that's saying that, that's the only way we can add it to the budget. I just think that should the referendum not pass, we'll have to reconsider the budget in its entirety, especially going into the spring. And so for the sake of our flexibility and being able to consider the budget in its entirety and how to fit different things in at different points in time. I think option one does preserve some flexibility in a way, but yeah, so I'm okay with option one.
So for me, I think of this as being an issue of fairness and an issue of retention and how we treat our our veteran staff. And I don't see this as something that I want to wait to implement. I think that it should have happened a while ago, and I'm just really grateful that it's coming to us now with the numbers that we need to act. And so my preference would be to implement it as soon as we can, retroactive to July.
2024, July 2024.
Yes, July 2024.
Board Member Vandermeulen.
I had to rethink about this. As much as I would like it in a referendum, we do owe it to our staff to probably do it as soon as possible. So therefore, I'm have to agree with Laura on this. I and Maya as well. You both made some excellent points and pretty clear we can't wait. So I think we're gonna have to include it regardless. And I know that's gonna be incredibly difficult, and I know what I'm asking. I respect my board even considering this. But our staff and our veteran staff deserve it, and this is a major reason I'm hearing for people leaving is I could get this many steps if I move somewhere else. I could get credit for this much of my work if I work somewhere else. So I think if we want to retain staff, I think we have.
Board Member Muldrow. Or,
Yeah, I fully support kind of moving forward in this process. I think this is a retention strategy. I think it's an important reconciliation. And I'm not sure if we get to have this conversation in the same way we get to have other conversations related to the referendum in terms of our long-term reality, because in some ways we're writing an error. I do think that I'm hesitant at this point in our budget process to pile on to what we're willing to spend if we do not pass the referendum. And I think the long-term consequences of that are things we really need to take into consideration. The other thing I want to acknowledge is that while I've been on the board, I've seen us add to our budget and not take away to balance our budget. And that's a practice I think we need to move away from strategically and as part of passing our referendum. I think our community deserves a board that will take into consideration the factors and make hard decisions related to our budget. And I don't think those hard decisions need to be how people are compensated or the reconciliation of people being paid or compensated at the right level for the amount of work that they've been in. I think have performed for our district. I think I'm a little torn about how to move forward at this point. I absolutely support this $1.7 million allocation to reconcile. But I think it being associated with the passing referendum is just confronting the reality of our budget at this point. And so, yeah, I think it's a complicated conversation. I'm glad we're having it in a nuanced way, and I hope we can be really thoughtful in terms of what it means. My question for you in relationship to what you just said to Board Member or Vice President Pearson, Bob, is that you said, were we to do this, we risk going under the board's policy, going beneath between 15 and 10%, and that would require us to change the policy.
Yes, that's what I said. We would monitor it as the year went on to get a sense of where we are at. Just much like we talked about the need for creating better systems to track monthly in terms of thinking staffing, what does that mean in terms of budget expenditure, actual expenditure? It's fairly significant with salary and benefits, not having positions filled, so we're already developing better systems for us to monitor that month to month. So we will be tracking that, right? We're gonna be doing that regardless.
I am curious about. And I think this is a question as much for you as for the board itself. In terms of our own policy, stewarding our own policy and adhering to our own policy, I do think that's a priority. However, we have existed outside of our policy on the other side of that policy for a few years now. And I have wondered if maybe what we need to do is change our policy so that we have greater room to go beyond our policy upward, not necessarily under 10%. That doesn't interest me in any way as a board member. I want to be pretty clear about that. But if we're going to exceed that 15% and position the district to be in a better place in terms of short-term borrowing and have better options in the long term, I'll say for myself, there is an appetite to say, what does it look like for the board to be between 12% and 18%, or to be between 15% and 30% of our budget, so that we're not outside of our own policy on the other side of the policy. That's it for me.
Board Member Nichols.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the comments so far. I think so I see option one is to put it on the operating referendum, if it passes, and that to me feels like, I mean, that's a no-brainer in my perspective. I don't like the idea of, though, if the operating referendum does not pass, we're just not doing anything about this. If the operating referendum doesn't pass, I guess this is more of a process question. So when we come to so let me just pause that thought for a moment. When we come to the October budget vote, we're gonna be voting on two budgets.
Yes.
Right? A 24-25 budget, and then one if it's passing with the referendum.
Correct.
Okay. If we were not to pass the referendum, would we be coming back to the 24-25 budget to make some adjustments mid-year, or would we continue on with that budget and then start the 25-26 school year budget and start making adjustments there? Because I know right on the heels of voting for this budget and then going to the ballot, where we would be literally starting up the next school year's budget development process. So I'm wondering about where the adjustments would come into play. Would it come in through the next school year's budget development process?
Good questions. So the vote in October, think of it as you approved the June preliminary budget, which is gonna be the budget that's gonna be effect if the referendum is not successful. And so that budget, which I shared you the totals, right, include the 2.06%, includes the amendment to increase substitute teacher pay. Now we're discussing whether we should include this.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be, so you'll see two motions. It'll say, here's a budget that will be effective if passage is successful on the operating referendum, which is really the June preliminary budget with the revisions we talked about. Then there'll be another budget that will be effective if, for 24-25, if the referendum is successful. That budget will primarily, the big expenditure that will be included will be the additional 2.06% retroactive back to July 1. And then any other initiative that comes up between now and when you vote in October in terms of some considerations for it. So no matter what, after that October vote, you will have two budgets in play for 24-25, and then when the voters decide on November 5th, that'll tell you what budget's gonna be in place for the rest of the 24-25 student. You always have the authority under state law to amend that budget approved. It just requires a 2/3 vote of the board to amend that budget that's adopted in October. That's current.
Chair Castro, members of the board, just a couple of thoughts to add. It would always be my preference to avoid any mid-year changes that are substantial for many, many reasons, just the disruption. So I think there are a couple data points missing for us to have kind of that protracted conversation about what if. The first is enrollment. You know, what is our enrollment picture looking like for the future? That we can start looking at our next budget. The other is the result of, there's a no vote. Is it a lot? Is it a little? What does it cause us to do in terms of knowing that we may ask the community in April again as well? Some other version of, you know, what we learn from the results. So I do think that there are options for us to, I don't want to say slow this down, but to at least take a longer, a bigger picture look at it to avoid some of those, you know, really disruptive on kids and families decisions that we make. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't tax us with looking for efficiencies right now. What are some things midstream that we can identify that we can count on for removing from the budget? But that likely isn't gonna, you know, make up for the amount that Bob's talking about, fund balance and spend down that we already have on the books without the operating referendum.
I appreciate that. I think the reason I was asking about the what if, is certainly not to cause more disruption than we need. I think I was looking at the 1.7 and thinking, if it goes on a passing referendum budget, then that's the move that feels very natural. If we were not to be in that scenario, I still feel like having a commitment to righting what's been wrong is important. But then I might be asking, is there a way to maybe take the 1.7 and, I don't know, handle
Balance.
certain staff, you know, I mean, I don't know. So that's why I was trying to figure out, like, might there be a way to still,
Scaffold it across multiple.
yeah,
years.
like maybe, which you can get into dicey territory too, because they were selecting certain staff and not certain staff, and we kind of have been in that, but I think I was just trying to think of how could we still make movement on this student services salary compression, even if we couldn't bite the whole 1.7 in that one budget. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I was trying to consider. So,
I'm taking from this conversation, the 1.7 is a priority, capital P priority for this board. And I think there are other things that we are, you know, spending our budget on. That may be a priority, but not as urgent, not as important. That's the hard work of making reductions and recommendations. So the administration may have to bring back a list for consideration to see where does it rank in terms of the priority to the board as well, to make up for that. If that is indeed the priority and the direction.
Now, do we vote tonight or the end of this meeting? I forgot.
We vote at the end of September.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Blair's, I didn't get no chance to ask Blair.
I think. Board Member Moser Feltham, do you have any other questions or comments?
No, I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're good.
Do you have a sense of what budget?
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, John.
All right, thank you, Kate, Jennifer, and the team. It was a big team that worked on that topic.
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
Okay, we are gonna move to Fund 50. I'm gonna make some opening comments. You all know Josh Perkins, our Director of the Food and Nutrition Program. We also have with Josh, Becky Bender, our accountant, work for budget planning and accounting, but work for all the programs in business services. Becky's gonna be here to answer some specific questions if we have them. We're gonna talk a little bit about the context in terms of Fund 50. We were talking as the 23-24 school year ended, that the food nutrition program was not meeting the revenue benchmarks, and the expenditures were at what they were budgeted. And so just a little bit of a refresher in terms of how Fund 50, which is the fund that we're required to account for our food nutrition program in, and Fund 50, just the number it was designated, is intended to generate sufficient revenues to cover the costs of that program. We need to isolate the food nutrition program for purposes of U.S. Department of Ag, the federal level, and reimbursement of those meals that come from the federal government and state government. And so the law does not allow us to have a negative balance in Fund 50. So at the end of every year, we do our analysis. If revenues are short and expenditures are up, we have to either account for that through a balance in Fund 50. And if there's no balance in Fund 50, we need to transfer monies from our general fund, which is the fund. So our unaudited actuals in 23-24 required us to transfer $1.5 million from Fund 10 into Fund 50 to make the food nutrition program whole. We're forecasting, which is included in those revised numbers I gave you today for Fund 10, that we will need $2.9 million at the end of this fiscal year to support the food and nutrition program. And then on top of that, my team's been working with Josh and his team and Becky and several of us since the summer, and now have a plan where we intend to stabilize the costs and the revenues and bring the program back to self-sufficiency. The way the plan is looking right now, it'll take 8 years for us to achieve the growing of the program in terms of participation, to increase our revenues in, and the managing as costs as we I'll let that's kind of the overview. I'll let Josh take it from here and walk through the slides and detail kind of program and turnaround. Josh will call on Becky or me when he wants one of us to add in.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for setting the stage, and thank you all for taking time aboard. And Dr. Gothard, I want to emphasize a point that Bob concluded on, which is growing the revenues in the program, growing participation. This is a crucial part of what's going to be needed for us both to fulfill our mission in terms of adequately serving our community and also adequately generating revenues for fund as we go forward. This next slide, before I go further, has everybody or anybody seen John Oliver's segment on school food?
I just watched that.
Highly recommended if you haven't seen it. Tells the story well, entertaining way, more entertaining than Owl Beach. But I am going to get through some of the main points. What has happened to challenge 150, 23 to 24. This is the most recent year. So we had a substantial labor cost increase, $1.2 million from FY20. A substantial increase to food and supply costs. Inflation of some raw materials, and when we get to question time, we can entertain details as well. So some of the main inputs that we have as revenue generators for Fund 50 were up across the board. Those are a couple of huge categories, or I'll say 3: labor, food, and supply. So all are up, and at the same time, the last point here is that our meal participation is down 24%. From our pre-COVID levels. So at the same time that some of these costs are rising, some of the other incoming revenues have been in decline. They were so that is true of coming straight out of the pandemic. There has been some growth year over year, but that revenue from student reimbursement, student meal accounts has declined. What are we going to do looking to 24, 25? So recognizing that it is not a sustainable practice to have Fund 50 impose on the general fund at this magnitude, regardless of decisions of principle or strategy that we might want to make or investment. We need to shore up what is happening at Fund 50. We need to start making improvements, and most particularly improvements on our incoming revenues, which is again this theme of participation, greater interest and acceptance of our program, and more students eating meals. This slide really talks more about what we're going to do outside of participation to shore up the practices within the program, so to operate as efficiently as possible. But at the same time, when we say operate efficiently, that must be balanced with the quality of service we're providing. So we have to monitor our performance, our expenditures, and our metrics at the same time that we are not withdrawing service or quality from our community, because that is key to making sure more students want to eat, students are eating, and our revenues tie to that as well, to make sure that we're solvent, or we approach that solvency as quickly as possible. So the plan that Bob referred to is a large overarching plan. It's not overly complicated because food service finances are not typically overly complicated. You're carefully monitoring some main cost categories. And I've been through several chapters of my career in food service, and they don't change very much. What's really important about this plan is that it is comprehensive, it's thorough, and I made a point of coming up with a way of explaining the plan upwards and downwards that I felt confident in. The plan involves every member of the food nutrition management team. It also involves every member of the food nutrition team in general at the operational level. It's very important to me that anybody in the department be able to understand what our main priorities were in this plan. So a couple of specifics, and there are more we can get into discussing, but our menus were created using commodity pricing to fill salad bars with quality produce. What do I mean by that? Commodity is a word that is in some sectors fallen out of favor. It is our USDA foods entitlement. So each year, every public school district has an entitlement based on their meal counts from the USDA to purchase foods at advantageous pricing. An example of what we did the very first time around was berries. We consistently serve strawberries and blueberries on our salad bars. They're very nutritious. They're also very popular and very expensive. So we used USDA dollars to make sure we could consistently offer those foods to students, something I don't think we'd be able to do had we not leveraged those USDA dollars. This year, we refined that strategy a little bit more to include some of our proteins, which are, again, one of our most expensive items in the meal. We've established systems that indicate risks in time to make proactive adjustments. That's a mouthful, allowing us to prevent waste. Does that mean that every week the management team is reviewing every point of this plan, measuring and reporting every metric that we use for the department performance and saying, where are we doing okay? Where are we doing better than expected? Where are we falling behind? And what are we going to do about it? So again, returning to the theme of participation, that's a huge one. We are monitoring food costs. We are monitoring supply costs. We are monitoring waste, both at our commissary and in all the school sites, but at the same time coming back and saying, where do we need to pay attention most? Because with 52 schools and the staff that we have, it's not realistic for me to say, go out and solve every problem all at once. And to be honest, not every school presents the same problems. Some schools are doing quite well. Some schools are up in their meal counts. Some schools are very low in waste. Some schools are not. So we needed those diagnostics to really understand what we're needing to do most. The last point in this slide is something I'm going to return to in a couple of slides, which is what the specific strategy, one aspect of our specific strategy for this year. And that is to make sure we're paying adequate attention to what's happening in our CEP schools. Our CEP schools, our group of 16, represent the schools where meals are already free to all students. And we should be seeing, well, we do see on paper, no barriers to meals. No student has the barrier of a means testing application or a cost to the meal. And yet we see situations in our CEP schools where we have big opportunities. We see CEP schools that have very high participation, a lot of students eating with the program, and some where we say we should really be doing much better than this in this school. There are no barriers to students. And we'll return to that theme of barriers to participation overall. But this is one of our main focus areas this year, is to pay special attention to these 16 schools because they already fall in this category. I'm going to pause there to ask if there are any questions material I presented so far. Member Moulton.
Yeah, so I want to ask about the self-sustaining components of this program, or if we have self-sustaining components of this program. And I think what I'm asking in that question is, are we growing and processing our own food? And is there any expansion of that work? So if you have a community garden at a school, how is that incorporated into how students eat? Do we have any district-wide program that self-sustains cultivating our, and I think there's both the environmental impact of being able to locally resource food, the educational opportunity. And then there is the cost of if MMSD has a plot of land that we haven't put a school on and we put an orchard on it instead, there's a return on investment in terms of what it costs for us to buy an apple. Talk me through where we're at.
Thank you for the question, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. The short answer is that we do not have a district-wide program that addresses this, this aspect of our operations. In the last 2 years, there has been some initiation of that and some growth of that, and there will be additional growth this year through expansion of some grants that we enjoy with our partners at Rooted and Reap. But there are many opportunities in this realm, and I wholeheartedly agree with the tie-ins and the benefits for students that can accrue. Not only cost benefits for raw product, but the educational opportunities, potentially even employment training opportunities that can happen with gardening in this way. So right now, we're at the point that the district, even with only the salad bar, and I'll say only, it's not a small gesture, but it's one salad bar in each school. We still have volume sufficient to make careful planning of a district-wide initiative of this nature, something we really have to think about really carefully, not only in terms of investments, but also training for the number of people who would be needed to operate the program. So there's a lot of potential there, but right now we are, the way I would characterize it is we're just past the point of the initial pilot program, where we use some student-grown produce at some public or actually district partnership plots to serve back to students, and really understanding the full volume of produce we need for a full-fledged plan.
So I just want to emphasize that I think that that's a tremendous opportunity in multiple ways, and I really appreciate that you all have been doing that work. I also want to highlight the work you've all have been doing around scratch cooking and really kind of ensuring the nutritional benefits of, you know, what we're serving our young people. I do hope that we're able to expand that opportunity because of the multiple kind of the triple bottom line that it provides. But in this kind of immediate moment, in terms of our scratch cooking and in terms of our kind of commitment to nutritious food, is that part of what's driving the increase in costs, that 14% increase that we're seeing? Is that just reflective of kind of where the market is? And I think anybody who's gone to the grocery store in the last couple of years is like, food is more expensive. Or is that really our approach and quality of food has shifted to such an extent that we are paying a lot more to do a much better job?
A great question. Because of our limited experience so far with initiating scratch cooking in the district, I have some data, but not enough to offer a thoroughgoing answer to your question, but I will use what I have. The general wisdom with scratch cooking is that you do not necessarily gain a lot of ground in your overall cost picture. You transfer cost from food to labor. That's the usual balancing of the scales. Is you need additional labor to conduct scratch cooking. The raw foodstuffs themselves can sometimes be extremely competitively priced. So I'm going to use again the USDA example. So the USDA does supply raw unprocessed proteins. Minneapolis is a district that makes excellent use of this, but you need training, labor, and equipment to leverage those products. So they are far less expensive pound for pound than a processed product and more desirable in many ways, but the cost offset is found in labor. So the scratch cooking pilot that we've done so far, I would not say I think this is a serious driver either way of our costs. It's just too limited. And I think what we've seen from it is that indeed it is now proven within our district that it does increase participation. It does increase, and probably most importantly, it does increase participation across means tested categories. It is a program that proved universally popular, and so we have some data now from within the district. I hope that.
That absolutely answers my question. My last question, should we increase the cost of our food? Should it be more expensive for those who can afford it to eat at school? Would that kind of curb some of, or offset some of what we're seeing?
Some, and that's referenced in a further slide, talking about obviously any meal price increase would need to be a proposal to the board. There would be some cost offsets, and we'll talk about that as part of the plan in a couple of slides.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Svenana, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, the age group for the seniors, is that like majority elementary? Like, how is that distributed throughout the district?
It is majority elementary and middle schools. Yeah, so it's a range of K through 8 schools. Yeah. Was there a question on this side of the room that I did not see? Sorry.
Thanks for coming forward. Regarding the challenges, for the school year that we just came out of, the labor costs that you report as being increased by 1.2 million from the previous year, is that mostly our hourly workers? Is it a combination of things? Because I know that we also invested in increasing the hourly wage for food service. So I'm trying to attribute, if when we talk about labor costs being increased, is part of that because people are also making more money and well, how would you describe the labor?
Short answer is yes, absolutely. Becky, I don't know if you want to jump in with some analytics here.
Sure. Short answer, I guess, is they didn't add FTE. So it was a combination of the $5 an hour raise, then the percentage increase, as well as benefit package changes. And at some point, you're gonna have a shift of employees using the benefits or not using them. Their main labor structure change was over the last couple of years. They've had some manager staff that were 10-month employees, and they've gone to 12-month employees. So they had the equivalent of a half an FTE increase based on that managership. But for the most part, their allocation in the last few years has not changed.
Okay.
That answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. I think that it's unfortunate, in my own opinion, to hear a year or so later that when the board voted to increase the hourly rate of folks working in food service at a time when there were a lot of vacancies as well in food service, that somehow a year or so later, it looks and is described as kind of the labor costs have gone up. You know what I mean? They have gone up because we invested in the hourly rate going up. And it just feels unfortunate to have this conversation about it being part of the financial challenge on the back end. So yeah. I mean, I think when as I remember, when we had talked about increasing any of the hourly staff rates, I do recall implications for Fund 50 and food services being mentioned. But I was under the assumption that whatever adjustments needed to happen within the department would happen, or that some other proposal would come to the board before an entire year or so had gone by. So, I guess and I know you haven't gotten into the plan yet, but, yeah, it's unfortunate that we're kind of hearing about something that should have been a good thing seems to have implications for the department in ways that either our revenues or our participation can't help kind of leverage the investment in staff. And then can you just clarify your point where it says significant staff turnover decreased our focus on cost control as we prioritize supporting daily operations over efficiency?
Absolutely. And if I might take them in turn, I think participation absolutely can and needs to help alleviate the additional expenditure.
Okay,
So if I want to correct, if there was an impression that I was saying participation can't help, it's the only thing that will actually offset those costs. The speed at which it can do so is perhaps the issue at bar. Is we will grow participation, but it will take time to do it in such a way to fully offset that investment in staff wage. So it is a yes to participation being the support structure that's needed. It is probably going to take, according to our plan, it will take longer than maybe comfortable, you know. But to your point, bring about it now, yes, mention that will offset this. What that means is the turnover in the staff, we came out of, and part of this is reaching back into a history that I wasn't personally present for, but I think I got good information from people who we had, because some of my management team includes those people. We had for a long time, very long time prior to the pandemic, a very stable staff structure. People wanting to move into jobs that were open, and so you had experienced, fully trained people moving from place to place, but generally maintain a pool of folks who really were well trained. And coming out of the pandemic, that was my first year, first as administrative manager, then as director. We had lost a couple of members of the management team that January. It was 2 months before I was hired. That was a packed time when I came in as interim director and then started the school year. You will all recall that was the time of the $5 wage increase to solve an almost critical level of recruiting problem. At that time, we were still operating without 2 members of the management team. They were hired in November. So in all humility, I have to say that for that, at least for the first half of that year, and probably in my recollection for the majority of that year, I was thinking about how to keep the services going. In the first semester, I was primarily saying that was October, late October is when the wage increase took effect. It did solve some recruiting problems quite effectively, but all these things have, you know, if you took about a week or 2 lag time, suddenly you're into December, first semester's over. So did we keep the boat in the water and continue serving kids? Yes, we did. Were we doing everything we could to manage and control the program? No, I can't say honestly that we were down a couple of managers in the second semester, training those managers, still dealing with problems. So it's not meant to say that if we have recruiting problems, we can't monitor the program. To say in the early part of my tenure, I don't think we were doing as much as we could do.
and actually, thank you for that, because I remember now that going back just even a couple of years ago, when there had been pretty significant vacancies.
Yes.
And there were very felt experiences out in the schools with lots of challenges. So I understand now what you're saying in terms of kind of focus, your energy was elsewhere.
Also on a human level, that fell on new staff as well. And I know that burden fell on new staff who came in and had to immediately begin operating the program. And I personally, I felt like we should be doing more to really get these folks oriented and comfortable, especially when they're one person in a school, which is all of our elementary schools. And that fell to them as well, that burden.
Thank you. Board Member Pearson?
I don't have a question.
Okay.
I don't. I'm actually.
Any more? Okay.
Oh, you have not been here for a couple.
Okay, I think we can move forward.
Shall I continue?
Yeah.
This slide, so financial independence by 2030. This slide is full of content. But I'm going to, and so I don't want to try to read through every number on this slide. It's yours, of course, to review, but I do want to hit the key notes. And then potentially entertain some questions here too. So the fiscal 25 operating transfer of 2.9 million consists of 2 million annual increase in labor costs over the past 2 years. And we have built in $500,000 as to be used for food supply. Are we on the right slide? Okay, good.
Yes.
Thanks.
Board member.
Point 2 is salaries and benefits are projected to increase 3% in 25, 26, and 2% annually for each year thereafter. This is indeed a projection. This is the further out we get. I'm going to repeat something I've said in several conversations with Becky and Bob. The further out you get, especially with benefits changes, the harder it gets to forecast with accuracy. But we tried to use a projection we thought would be realistic and not knowing for sure what the compound increase would be. The annual, this is to me the most important part. The annual revenue assumption includes a 7% participation increase, a 3%, I think I'm reading this, 3% reimbursement rate increase, and a proposed, this is back to the question about meal prices, 15-cent meal price increase in fiscal 26. So I'd want to draw special attention to the third point because in the context of our program's history, in order for this plan to fully function and amortize these expenditures as it is intended to do, we will be growing or attempting to grow participation in this program beyond any ceiling that it's been in the last 10 years. We will need to undertake an ambitious schedule of partnership and cooperation in making it a district mission to serve as many students as possible. And that is, as I said at the outset, both to fulfill our mission to the community and also because hand in glove with this goes the revenues to fund. So there will be, as much as we're looking at a potentially daunting compound increase in some of the expenditures, the way that we offset these expenditures is through an equally ambitious program of increasing participation. Next slide. The next couple of slides talk about how to do this, which is to define a standard consistent with the MMSD mission. The food and nutrition program, in the 2 years that I've been director of the program, I have many times with colleagues in BPA and in and outside the department and nonprofits in the city reviewed the history of the program. And one thing I think we are in need of is a substantially increased partnership to drive the program forward. And to do that, I think I'm proposing that we are operating off an agreed upon standard for what food nutrition should represent and offer the district, schools, and the students. And so several benchmarks of value are here. And our standard should be, which is consistent with our strategic framework, is to ensure broad access to high quality meals for all students. That may sound like a simple thing to say. The logistics and planning behind it, including scheduling, staffing, investments, they are not simple. So I think it's important to put it out there that we should certainly take as the base level benchmark to feed every free and reduced price eligible student in our district. Again, that might seem like something that would be evident because those students have access to those programs without any barriers. We are not doing it today. Through some combination, probably need a combination of factors. The plan that goes in meal access, the kind of meals that are served when they're served, how much time students have to eat them. We are not currently feeding every free and reduced price eligible student in the district, and this should be our benchmark. This alone will require an overall participation growth in the district of 13% to meet that benchmark. Our meals should represent good value to families of all cultural and economic backgrounds. This is something that I think all of us have heard much about in the last few years. This is a hot topic in school food service for certain. Bringing it out of the era of menus that were streamlined so far, they're uniform, unresponsive to communities. So in order to build participation to where we want and need it to be, our meals must represent that value to all our families. Lastly, district planning from every level, at every level, needs to prioritize increasing access to breakfast, lunch, and snacks for our students. So this is the definition of the standard that we want to pursue as a district. Next slide, please. And after the next slide, I'm gonna pause for a minute because this is pretty meaty stuff. And I want to entertain questions or discussion if there is. We've broken these into two general categories, and one has to do with operational practices and initiatives within the food and nutrition department. And the other has to do with initiatives and practices and planning that must be done in partnership with parties within the district that are not in the food and nutrition department. So parties who are responsible for planning what our students do every day, district leadership in general. The food and nutrition department is going to be focusing on improving our food quality, moving more towards fresh versus packaged meal service in every area that we can, because we have seen that indeed it does increase interest in participation, expanding scratch cooking while we are monitoring our costs closely. Finding more ways to engage students so the menus reflect student-driven priorities and initiatives, expanding farm to school, expanding the cultural responsiveness of our menus. Those are all things that by and large happen within the department. We certainly engage students. We certainly engage partners in the nonprofit sector, academia, the general community to inform our efforts in that way. But those are things that the department takes on. The district partnership participation-based goals are more things that we need full integration of our planning processes to accomplish the participation goals that we have. So our facilities and scheduling need to support access to meals for all students. That might include such things as how we build out schools that are now in the referenda. It might have to do with how we use some donations that are aimed in this direction. But the facilities need to support all of those endeavors that we want to increase value to the community. Every student who qualifies for free and reduced price meals should have access without difficulty. So again, going back to the CEP schools as our case study here, we need to observe any situation where a student who has no cost or administrative barriers to a meal is not eating that meal and find out why. What is happening? Why are they either feeling unwelcome or barred in some other way from getting access to those meals because they need them by definition? We know this, and we need to make sure we're serving those students. And then a full partnership to train teaching and administrative staff to promote eating at school and nutritional benefits of school meals, the culture of participation. And I want to share some early conversations that I've had, particularly at Lakeview School, because this is a school, a CEP school in our district that has a very high level of participation. And my question was, well, how did you do it? And the principal there said there's no magic answer. And then she proceeded to describe the culture of participation that she had created with her staff and executes every day. And I said, well, that is the magic answer. It may not seem like magic because it's completely normalized within this environment. However, that is the magic. If students are truly welcomed by staff and encouraged to participate, the big takeaway is they do. So expanding that culture is part of the district partnership. I'm going to stop there. There's also a chart here at the end, which really articulates where participation needs to go for this plan to work. But I want to stop there and entertain any further questions or discussion.
Do you mind if we go to that chart? Because I think it's really good.
It's right here. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. It's just appended to the bottom of the slide. Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. Sorry. I thought you meant
Okay.
the chart on the next page.
No, just this abbreviated. It's much shorter than the previous.
Any questions or comments? Board Member Simpkin?
I'm curious about high schools and that first bullet point for district partnership. Since we've already remodeled those schools, and I believe what I believe I know is that students often don't have time to eat within the cafeteria, so that is a barrier. So what I'm wondering is, I guess I'm fact checking that to make sure that that's true. And then if that is, are those conversations that you plan to start soon around how to make adjustments so that students do have enough time to go through the line and then eat?
Yes, I think the answer to the fact check, it is the case. We currently have a single lunch period in the high schools. And I will say, I think it's accurate, a range of between 1,700 and 2,000 students in those buildings. So that puts a lot of pressure on students to get the meal in that time. Those conversations have started. This is a very public way of starting that conversation at this level. Those conversations have started because I identified this immediately as a potential barrier for students being able to get full access to those meals if they had a single chance to do so. And I think that is something we need to take a look at as well. Again, looking at our colleagues to the north, Dr. Goth recently came from the same region. The director of Minneapolis shared with me that it was a requirement that all of the high schools had 3 lunch periods. And I think that planning initiative was aimed in that direction too, to make sure that all students had a fair chance to have those meals. It is not exclusive to the high schools. In some cases, that planning or that planning process has moved down into some of the middle schools. So this is an opportune time for us to have those discussions and find out really what the factors were that drove the advantages to those decisions, and then figure out how we preserve those advantages without restricting access to meals.
I'll be really interested to see how that conversation progresses, because it did start, or at least I became aware of that 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, with a different context around the idea of releasing all of the students at the same time, and how complex that is for a number of different reasons, including the ability to access food. So I'd like to be apprised at how that moves forward, so we can see if we're able to come up with some good solutions.
Of course, it is truly complex. Right.
Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks. Thank you for the long view here. I appreciate that a lot. It's an exciting and ambitious plan. One thing that I would love to see added under those district partnerships, I still think that there's room for thinking about what the instructional, what can be done instructionally around this. Like, I'm like an idea factory. This is just part of my personality, so I'm not going to give you a billion ideas because you've got your own staff to do that. But I think that there's still room for thinking about how does your work with curriculum and instruction. And since your plan is so long, right? Since I think it was a 9-year plan, I remember one time I had a meeting around 9th grade on track, and the point of the meeting was to have the meeting, to just get in the same room and talk about potentials. And I would love to see in this 9-year plan, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well, so pardon me if I'm not making total sense. I would love to see you looking for opportunities to see instructional shifts that match your goals. I hope that made sense.
It did, and I completely agree. There are many areas of overlap.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? All right. Oh, Megan.
I think I'd also just like to offer the student perspective, especially when we're talking about high schools and stuff like that. Not only are you having like all of the students in one period, which is already a lot, but you're also competing with like a bunch of clubs. You have, I know not every school has this, but like food trucks and open campus. So like West, we have all of these like coffee trucks and different, options. And then also we have our lunch divided into a lunch. So our lunch is only technically 30 minutes, and we have 20 minutes where we're supposed to be like meeting with our teachers and taking tests and like asking those types of questions. And like I've sat in a room taking a test, and a student that went and got their lunch cafeteria came in at like 12:20 and couldn't finish their test. So like sometimes our options are very limited, and I would just like ask that you, as you start to have these conversations, which are obviously very important, you take that into consideration.
Thank you so much for adding detail from the firsthand student perspective. Yeah, I wanted to respond a bit, but for President Nichols.
Yes, I was just gonna say and thank you for that, Megan. When I look at even the next slide, which I know you haven't covered, but it's in the deck, and you're kind of looking at how many of our school sites would need an increase in participation. I mean, Fund 50 is supposed to balance, right? So in many ways, the slide that shows like the 9 or 10 years, that's not like that's a plan to balance Fund 50.
Yep.
Right? And so the dollars that are in there for Fund 10 are dollars that we don't get to dream with in many ways, right? A lot of us have talked about wanting to be excited about expanding scratch cooking kitchens, expanding universal free lunch, like looking for new ways to do exciting things with food. And I think right now we're in a place where we're saying we need to balance Fund 50. It's gonna take some Fund 10 investments over the next X number of years. And while we're doing that, you have a plan to increase participation, right? My wondering is who helps increase participation? Because that feels like more than just what your department can do alone. It almost feels like it needs like a district campaign on making our food, like a healthy, attractive option that you should be taking advantage of. So I'm curious, Dr. Gothard, I know a couple meetings ago, you were like, always ask about the supports and always ask about like the structures. I am wondering, like, if we need to get participation levels up as a way to bring in that revenue, will we have like a district plan that accompanies, I guess, the food and nutrition department's efforts? Because I don't know, yeah, that's what I'm asking. And I know we probably have a lot of things going on from the district, but
I think there's a lot of work to do. This is not anyone's idea of a plan to have an 8-year period where we're already behind and at the same time try to grow. So our backs are against the wall. I'm gonna ask staff to continue to bring information forward so that we can monitor this together as well and look for ways that we can either create efficiencies or increase, sales.
okay.
And the other piece as well is, CEP and even universal meals. These are not just quick solutions. There are always open up other barriers as well.
Okay.
When it comes to this. So, USDA is all reimbursement. So there's a lot of paperwork that's involved in this as well. This is not you just get money and it's you serve and you get reimbursed for what you serve. So, this is really comprehensive and, it's going to require all of us to monitor this and hold, Director Perkins and staff all accountable to make sure that we get this back right side up.
Okay.
It would be hard for me to sit here tonight and say, let's expand scratch cooking, let's expand until we start to see a trajectory that shows us that our program can be made whole.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a hard reality check at this point, but I appreciate just the thoughtfulness of thinking about a multi-pronged approach to kind of monitor the expenditures and look at how we can drive participation. And my hope is that there's some thought around what will it take in a communications and a family engagement approach and strategy relative to driving participation, because there's a lot of families who may qualify for free and reduced lunch who aren't taking advantage, and it's not because the district hasn't provided the funding. There's something else attached to that feeling of getting a free and reduced lunch. And so anything that we can do to keep learning and trying to communicate, I think it behooves us to do that.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say to add is that what you described is absolutely, I think is absolutely necessary. I don't think that the efforts of the food and nutrition department alone could accomplish that participation increase. And I say that in part with respect to my unmet colleagues of years past. The food and nutrition department has been running for a while at a participation rate that would not allow us to fund the program currently. And it's incumbent now upon us to try to really grow that participation. And I do agree. It will need to be a full partnership. The next slide is participation versus enrollment. And this kind of just circles back on those themes. What is happening in situations where, or what happens at respective grade levels, so we can understand how pressures might be bearing on students in ways that make it difficult for them to get a meal, even if they would like to, or even have free access to do so. So what you see here, just in sum, is, and then I'll get to my last slide, and thank you for allowing me a little extra time for discussion, is that you see that our CEP schools are carrying the bulk of the participation here. So in some ways, you would expect this. There are no barriers to meals in those schools. However, as I said, we do have big opportunities in some of those schools that are not serving anywhere near as many students as you would imagine that they would, with free access to meals. So really looking at those cases to say, how can we pick up even more participation in situations where there should be no roadblocks to that? And then in the high schools, to your points, we have a situation where we don't have high participation, and we have to, in equal measure, look at what are the factors that is driving that lack of participation in high schools. In some cases, it may be wanting to develop the menus, needing to develop the menus. We've had some good early successes with that, but maybe more is needed. But I couldn't have explained it any better. You know, these competing pressures, even within the time that is available, really driving it some difficulty and challenges for students getting those meals. The last slide is, we wanted to end without another chart. We wanted to just try to describe, and I want to thank my colleague Amy Knight in marketing for a depiction of what we hope we will be able to realize, which is getting everybody to the table. We really want to see every student. I'm not going to say something exclusive about packing lunches. We want to see every student who wants to be enjoying meals that we serve, feeling that they are good meals, feeling they're high quality, welcome to our table. And not only that, we want every student at every grade level to feel this way, regardless of whether or not, you know, they're facing competing tensions or the ability to leave campus or spending money in your pocket, to say, we really do want to enjoy the food at this program. We feel that's a worthwhile thing to do, but also staff, also families coming to events. That full buy-in across the district and across the community is really what we hope to see in the coming years to drive the success of this plan. So with that, I want to conclude and ask if you have any final questions, but also thank you.
Board Member Mold.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we don't always emphasize is kind of the developmental needs related to nutrition and how different they are depending on the age and growth of a specific student. So when I think of my own child's experience related to eating at school, there's days where, you know, in third grade, my kiddo was like eating 3 bites of something because they were so excited to talk to somebody about something. And then there have been these times where teachers have pointed out to me, oh, you might want to make sure that she has like an extra snack. She is starving. She must be going through like a growth spurt. So when you think about kind of how to meet our students where they're at, in terms of making sure a kiddo gets the right food for their body at any given point in their kind of growth trajectory, how does that factor into participation, right? Like a parent might say, oh, I'm not sure if my kid is eating all of what they're getting at school. If I send them with a lunch, at least I know how much of the sandwich is coming home at the end of the day. and how to factor that into how my kid is doing. If a kiddo needs seconds or is still hungry after a first serving, how do we navigate that dynamic?
I think my best answer to your question is contained in what we saw at Nuestro Mundo for the simple reason, I think it is simple and intuitive. The quality of the food drives a lot of what you're addressing. It's common. I think the worst thing that any parent can hear, it doesn't matter whether it's scratch cooking, it doesn't matter whether it's not scratch cooking, is to have a student come home and say, I took lunch today, or I didn't eat lunch. I came home hungry. I didn't eat during my school day. And so addressing this, the grade levels are broken out. They have different nutritional guidelines and requirements for different grade levels. But I know from experience in the field that doesn't answer the whole need. That doesn't, saying that you serve a USDA compliant meal is not an inspirational statement. That's a requirement. So I don't hang my hat on this. Say, well, what is it that's going to make your student want to eat the full meal? That's why what I saw at Nuestro was, it wasn't a student taking all the required, and this is very common in our business, unfortunately, taking all the required components because they were coached to do so and throwing away 60% of what they took. What I saw instead was, and that's a heartbreaker on multiple fronts, for the parent whose child did not eat a full meal, for the school food service director who's saying, I'm already back against the wall with cost, and 60% of the meal went in the trash can. I can't have that. All of those parties. But what I saw in Nuestro was the kids took the whole meal and they ate the whole. And that, to me, was kind of the key.
I really appreciate that. I agree, we can't afford to feed the trash can. I also think we serve students who are in a variety of complex spaces. I think about like our students who are pregnant, our students who are experiencing whatever kind of specific needs related to their faith or related to their diet or related to their allergies. And some of the complexity that goes into this work. I really appreciate Nuestro Mundo as an example of getting kids to be fully like satisfied by what's being offered, and that as kind of a stepping stone to know the quality of the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Can we move on?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Becky. Okay, let's get ready to roll to the most exciting topic on the agenda tonight. Cash borrowing. Yay. So this will be quick. It's just an update. When the next slide, Tessie. We're proposing to borrow $50 million this year for our TRAN, which is our tool that we use to pay our bills in the first part of the year. So to go over the basics, we have higher expenditures than revenues in because we're a property tax contingent school district. Most of our money from the property tax start coming in January. And so first half of the year, we're short on cash. Second half of the year, we have cash. Every year we estimate what we're going to need to pay our bills with professionals in the finance world. Last year, we had a $60 million TRAN. The 2 years prior to that, it was 50 million. So we're staying right in that neighborhood of what we need. So we take it out in September and we pay it off in September. So we get our final property tax settlement in August. We use that to pay off our TRAN, and then we come before the board and have you vote in September to allow us to get that $50 million. And then our plan will be to pay that back the years from. Any questions on that?
Board Member Simpkin.
So last year, we ended up earning interest on our borrowing. What is the projection for this year?
That's an excellent question. We were a little bit late for a variety of reasons out of our control, our partners, in terms of getting the meeting scheduled. They're working on preparing that schedule, and I can get you that information. Last year I had a detailed table. I'll share that information with you either at the next meeting or possibly through a memorandum or a memo. outlining what was projected.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. Good question.
Board Member Muldrow?
I feel like we've talked about this before, but because we do have a significant amount in our fund balance, is there an expense to the district that we want to reconsider related to borrowing? I know that we were able to earn resources in borrowing last year. Why wouldn't we just use our fund balance to do this? You know, our fund balance is double what we're borrowing. Why are we borrowing?
Right, so remember the fund balance was just, it's a point in time calculation on June 30th. It doesn't reflect how much money we have in the bank at any one time. It's statutory calculation we do. Our comptroller Natalie Root works with our financial advisors and we map out when our bills are gonna come due now and what we have available to access. It doesn't change what we need in terms of that 50 million. I said last year we did 60 million. We still think 50 million is what we're gonna need. That's been reviewed and signed off by the financial advisors, and then it's a separate law firm that takes a look at it, walks through, asks us all questions. There's due diligence on that end. They agree with the amount that we need, 50 million. So that's just the realities of where we're at.
I appreciate Board Member Simpkins' question about kind of the ability to generate revenue from the interest we will earn on this short-term borrowing. What is the interest rate of the 50 million we're borrowing?
I don't have like I said, I don't have the final table. We're 2 weeks later than we normally are and normally have that information for. Don't have that final review and working with them. I will provide you that information in terms of what we've had.
Will we get both of those kind of interest information at the same time? So both what we will earn from that and what we're paying interest simultaneously?
Yeah, I wanna update the table that I had last year where we talked, where I shared with you the premium that we're gonna earn, our net interest expense, what we expect. And you can see what those numbers are.
All right, that's it for me, Chair Castro.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're good.
All right, Jen Shepke, our project director for our referendum is here. We had the slides to kind of bring you up to date. Even though they're diligent to stay here, I'll give it to Chair Castro to how much time he wants us to spend on this update, or we call it a wrap. But before we call it a wrap, I just want to say the sessions have been going on in terms of at the schools and community session at 3 days last week. We meet 3 days this week and then 3 days following. So they've been interesting, good questions being generated. So I'm enjoying them. But I'll let Chair Castro in terms of how to run through and give you an update.
As you had planned to do so.
I can defer to whatever you would like.
I mean, the update is what Bob just shared. So we have been doing our community engagement sessions, both school-based for our specific sites and also general community-based. We have a mix of those. And we've been getting feedback and we talk about what the school might expect in a referendum. We talk of the basics of the referendum in those sessions and help the public better understand the mechanics of the budget and why we need the referendum.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, having heard that, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Megan, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Somebody second.
I did.
Thank you.
So we're adjourned.
See you, team.
Bad